Welcome to the Bordeaux Show, an ongoing exploration of the famed region and its wines. I'm Ron Edwards, Master Sommelier and Director of Wine Education here at Winebow. We invite you to place any and all questions or comments into the Q&A, as we will not be managing that live chat window. Let me introduce your host, Certified Bordeaux Educator TJ Griffin. TJ has held many jobs within the wine industry, from hospitality to wholesale. Throughout his career, what he enjoyed most was learning about wine and sharing that knowledge with others. As the corporate wine educator for Winebow, he now enjoys the privilege of doing what he loves full time. And now here to discuss today's topic as part of the Families of Bordeaux series, Entre de Mer. TJ.
Good morning, Ron.
Good morning to you, sir.
Yes, we've stretched out 6 families into several different presentations. I didn't foresee this when we started, but there's so much to talk about. We don't want to shortchange anybody, you know?
Well, if you started talking about my family and all of my relatives as if it were 6 families, and you talked about every individual, it would take half a year. I've got a lot of cousins, man.
Someday we have to talk about this because I don't know if I really understand the once removed, twice removed thing. So you'll have to explain that to me sometime about the cousins.
I struggle with it as well. Cousins. We even have a group of people that we call our almost cousins, because they're like once removed, meaning, you know, my wife's sister's sister-in-law, but their kids grew up together, so they're technically they're friends. They're not related at all, but they're so close that they're essentially we call them our almost cousins, and it confused all of the teachers in the school system because they all went to the same schools. It was pretty.
Well, yeah, we're heading down the home stretch in the 6 families of Bordeaux. We have today and we have next time, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But today we're going to talk about the region Entre de Mer. There we go. This is a geographical region as defined by the Bordelais, but it's also an appellation. Today we're just going to be talking about the region, sort of an overview. So this is the largest subregion of Bordeaux. It covers about 7,400 acres of land, but a lot of that land is forest and other greenery, a lot of other agricultural crops besides grapes. So it's not all grapes. In fact, most of it's not grapes. The total area under vine is about 3,700 acres. And there's more currently, I don't know the exact number, but there's more than 250 different producers in the region. So quite a bit. So this is the map from Bordeaux.com, which is my go-to source. And you can see all these little appellations. We'll talk about those later. But this is a pretty large area. It kind of roughly forms a triangle, starting from up in the northwest at a spot called the Bec d'Ombre, which is where the confluence of the Garonne and Dordogne rivers, with that point where they sort of split off. And then you see on the western, southern side, you see the Garonne River, pretty straight line down there. And then up in the north to the east is the Dordogne River, a lot more twisty, and that will come into play as we talk about that. And then the eastern boundaries is really the end of the Gironde Département. So it's a large area, and there's a lot to talk about here. The agricultural crops that I mentioned are a lot of cereal grains, which I wouldn't have expected, and a lot of orchard fruit, which I would expect. Orchard fruit tends to be in a lot of areas around the world, not too far off from the grape vineyards. So not a big surprise there. So
all the cereal grains could have turned the Entre de Mer into a major beer region or whiskey region.
Yes. Maybe it is. I don't know. I didn't delve too far down into which agricultural grains they have. But yeah. So again, just so we know where we're at, down here, the Garonne, up here, the Dordogne River. So this is between 2 seas, which makes no sense to me, right? Dust off your high school French, Ron.
Didn't take high school French.
Well,
as I've said many times, my French
can't really dust it off then. Dust off your high school Spanish because there's a lot of similarities here. But this is confusing if you speak French, you know that entre deux mers means between two seas. Between two seas. Pretty straightforward. But the question is, what seas? What seas are we talking about? This is not between two seas. This is a region between two rivers. The only thing that I can think of that's between two seas is here. It's the country of Turkey. So it's between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. Now that would make sense if Turkey meant between two seas, which I don't think it does. But entre deux mers is actually derived from entre deux marées, which means tides. How it got to be shortened to entre deux mers, I do not know, but it happened. But this is the origin of it. It was between two tides. That doesn't really make a lot of sense either until you talk about this. This is the Garonne River. So this is what is called a tidal bore. And both the Garonne and Dordogne rivers have this tidal bore coming in from the Atlantic Ocean through the Gironde estuary and funneling down into the rivers. So there are tides, you know, just as there are tides in the ocean and tides in large bodies of water, there are tides in these rivers. And this is a tidal bore. Ron, you are familiar with the concept of a tidal bore, correct?
Yeah, totally.
Is this you surfing in Garonne?
No, I wish. I'd actually love to go to Bordeaux and be there for one of the tidal bores. It would be super fun. You can, if you're careful and you pick the right section of river, you can ride for literally a mile without getting off. So it's sort of like kayaking where you have to leave a car downriver and upriver, and you'll see these crazy dudes chasing the boar. So they'll fall and they'll have a chase car that's following them along, and they'll jump out and jump in the car and run ahead of the boar and then get back in the water and keep going. It's pretty fascinating. You know, it's and there are several other places. This is a fairly small bore in the concept. There's one in China that you can look at on YouTube. It's about 8 feet, meaning the wave itself is about 8 feet. It's massive. It's one of those that doesn't have a bunch of the undulations behind it. It just has one giant wave instead of this ripple effect. It's fascinating. There's another place in up in Alaska. There's another river that they ride the tidal bore, and a few other places.
Yeah, there's apparently, like you're talking about, the one in China is sort of like this big 8-foot wave that just comes down. So that is one type of tidal bore, and then you have these other ones that are these undulating waves, which looks more appropriate for surfing. Looks like it would be a lot of fun if you could surf, which I can't, but. So that explains how we got to between two seas. It's really between two tidal rivers with these tidal bores that somehow got shortened into two seas. So the Entre deux Mers region is one of the longest wine histories of any wine region in France, not just Bordeaux. It dates back almost 2,000 years. As much of Bordeaux, especially on the right bank, was first planted by Romans. But the area earned its reputation due to the Benedictine monks and Benedictine monks, I should say, with a K, in the Middle Ages. Of course, they started for religious reasons, but that soon turned into commerce, as we see all over Western Europe. The monks basically preserved viticultural and winemaking knowledge and advanced it, you know, pretty impressively. This is the Abbey of La Sauve-Majeure, the ruins of it. And La Sauve-Majeure comes from Latin term granda silva, which means large forest, because this area was, and still is, very forested. So it makes sense. So this is the remains. This is something that if you do go to the Entre deux Mers region, apparently is a do not miss site, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which makes sense. And let's talk about soil and geology here. The soils, it's a large area, so of course the soils are very varied. This is a very good cross-section map. So you see the blue, Ron, this is basically a limestone plateau upon which everything is built on that. So you have different clays and gravels towards the river, lots of limestone pockets, sandy at the top, more, again, as you're going down to the river, more clay, and then you get really close down to the other river in the east, you get sand and gravel. So this is a simplified, you know, cross-section, of course, but if you look at how big that triangle was at the beginning, there are many, 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 many different soil types, and thus many different terroirs. I have not been yet to the Entre de Mer region, but I would like to go someday. But apparently, it is one of the most beautiful regions in Bordeaux. So we think of Entre de Mer wines, Ron, as sort of everyday wines and nothing too flashy. But the chateaux themselves, many of them are as impressive as anything in the left bank or right bank. Amazing chateaus. This is Chateau de Regnac.
You certainly would think that would be elsewhere in the more famous area, I suppose. That's absolutely stunning. It also is very reflective that they have limestone underground, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because all the chateaux are built out of that limestone base that they can quarry.
Yeah, I wonder. Well, I guess it makes sense because we're talking about the 18th century. The wines from Entre de Mer were very prized and very sought after. So it explains that why these chateaux were probably built around that time reflect that. And sort of the region itself as a winemaking region kind of went down in stature, but these old chateaus remain to show its former grandeur. The properties are, the most estates in the Entre de Mer are quite large, but this was not always the case. In fact, it's a fairly recent development, and there's been a lot of consolidation, as there are, across Bordeaux and across many wine regions, consolidation. So there's less producers and bigger ones, but still quite a lot. 250 is a fairly good amount. So when we talk about Entre de Mer as an appellation, we're talking about white wine only. We'll get into that in the next presentation. But the region, as a wine region, actually produces more red wine than white wine, which I did not know, because I always think of Entre de Mer. Again, you have to distinguish between Entre de Mer, the region, and Entre de Mer, the appellation. So for white wines, these are the four biggies. These are in the AOP for Entre de Mer. It actually requires, and this is interesting, Ron, you don't see this very often, you must have a blend of two of the principal varieties. These are the principal varieties, and that's a minimum of 70%. And then the 30% remaining is the accessory varieties, which we see like Uni Blanc and Merlot Blanc, et cetera, et cetera. But the requirement that it's a blend is kind of unusual.
Is there a most common blend? I know they lead with Sauvignon Blanc.
They lead with Sauvignon Blanc. Muscadel is quite popular. Perhaps more important than Semillon to many properties. They don't think. I think when you talk about, Pessac, Léognan, Grave, you're definitely Muscadel, sort of the third grape. But here in Entre de Mer, it gets just about equal footing, if not more so than Semillon. And Sauvignon Gris is actually quite popular as well. So these are your four major grapes for the white wines through the area. But if it's a red wine at least in the Entre de Mer appellation, then it's just a Bordeaux AOC or Bordeaux Supérieur. We'll talk about that in a second. And there's actually some experimentation with some estates here with other grapes that are not allowed at all, like Syrah, which would be interesting. And it's just Vin de France. But this area being not as expensive as other areas, you can afford to do that, I guess, with parts of your vineyard. You can play around a little bit.
So for those in the audience who may not have experienced, Sauvignon Blanc versus Sauvignon Gris, why don't we give them a little bit of an idea of how different they really are, even though, they sound like offshoots of each other. Mm-hmm. And I suppose in some degree they are. But they do come across in the final output quite differently. There's a few places in the New World where they're grown. Like Cassigny-Macoul makes a Sauvignon Gris that's a really good example of the grape. So, the first thing I'll start this, and then you can jump on the bandwagon here. The first big difference is the lack of strong pyrazines. Sauvignon Gris does not carry that real green bell pepper, green herb note that you will find in the dominance of Sauvignon Blanc from cool climates, especially, or New Zealand. It's nothing like that. And then I see you have a note here that it adds structure. I'll let you hit that one. I have my impressions of the grape in that regard, but when you say structure, what are you referring to it bringing to the wine?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought this up because it is important for those who haven't delved into this. So Sauvignon Blanc and Sauvignon Gris is a color mutation of Sauvignon Blanc, and you can look at the very different color of the grapes on the right to the left, and think about Pinot Noir, which mutates, and I have never seen this, but apparently can mutate not just within a vine, but within a bunch. You could have some Pinot Noir berries and some Pinot Gris berries and some Pinot Blanc berries, and they're all basically the same grape that has mutated, but that the difference isn't just color. The difference is flavors, aromas, structure here. So Sauvignon Gris, very floral, and I would definitely agree with you that pyrazine note's just not there. It's much more floral, and there's a weight to it. There's a heaviness to it. That structure that it's fresh, but there's a fleshiness to it that in a blend gives the wine a heft. And varietally, I've never thought about this, Ram, and I'm thinking about it now as you're talking about it, like varietal wine from Sauvignon Gris, like the one from Cossigny Macul. Would you say maybe in a blind tasting setting that maybe, I'm trying to think of what I might call it, Albarino, would that be a fair miss?
Maybe. The real thing here is the skin tannin comes through, at least in the couple of examples I've tasted, which is Pinot Gris-like to me. You know, you get a Pinot Gris skin contact wine, and I think it's fairly close to that. It's more neutral than Sauvignon Blanc by a fair margin, and it's sort of it doesn't hit me with the fatness and like waxiness perhaps of Albarino, but I can see where you're going. I can't even imagine how someone would come to a proper conclusion about this wine in a blind tasting going, hey, that's Sauvignon Gris.
Yeah.
Unless they happen to be somebody that makes it.
Yeah, so
because it's a little obscure to go down that path, but it is a very different experience than Sauvignon Blanc on its own.
Yeah, with the color mutations, you can see, you know, the gris means gray, but it's more pinkish. But when you see that color, you're getting some anthocyanins. So you are getting that little bit of tannin, especially if there's any kind of skin contact, which there usually is minimal at least. So yeah, so it adds a little bit of grape tannin and adds a little bit of that weight. And it's a very fun grape. And it's we'll talk about this when we get to Entre in the next presentation, but there's some wines that have a pretty good, they're not varietal Sauvignon Gris because that's not allowed, as I just said, but there's some wines that have a pretty good amount of Sauvignon Gris in the blend, and it really changes the wine quite a bit. So we are splitting Entre deux Mers, the region, up into two presentations. So the choice was to do a really long presentation today, or two shorter ones. So I went with the two shorter ones because I respect your time, and it's summertime and people are taking time off. So I don't want to take too much of your day today. But what we're going to do next time in our last 6 families of Bordeaux presentations, we're going to dive deep into the different appellations within Entre deux Mers. So there's quite a few, as you can see here. And the color code here is the green means white wines, the red means red wines, and the orange means sweet botrytized wines. So there is a very diverse winemaking palette here in Entre deux Mers, the region. And you can see Entre deux Mers, the appellation, third from the top, only white wines. But there's plenty of other wines to be seen and tasted and learn about. And we're going to talk about that next time, Ron. We're going to go right through all of these appellations. And by the way, this is listed roughly north to south, was the, I'm going with the Bordeaux map.
Yeah, I mean, Cadillac, Nupiac, Saint Croix du Mont, those are really delicious dessert wines and a great alternative for by the glass programs and affordable. Basically, it's made like Sauterne. It just doesn't have the reputation and maybe not as many details, but it's a great option. I used to pour a Lupiac by the glass because it was, it was the right kind of wine to show people Sauterne flavor profile without Sauterne price tag.
If you're not familiar with wine regions and you see Cadillac, you might think, wow, that must be the top of the line. Maybe maybe Cadillac should have called their car the Sauterne or Barsac or something. That wouldn't catch on quite as much as Cadillac though. But value, this whole region is tremendous value in wines, white, red, and sweet botrytis wine. In fact, many of the top Bordeaux Supérieur wines come from this region as well, and many of the best examples of that. We'll talk about that next time. And as I always do, point out some websites to check out. Bordeaux.com is the go-to site. Wine Cellar Insider, really great information from that website. And then if you want to check out, if your French is good, go to Entre2mer.com. It's good website. It's just all in French and there's no English translation, but you can translate it yourself if you want, or if you're very proficient in French, you can just read it. And that was our short, sweet episode, Ron, to get people into the region. And then next time we'll talk about the appellations.
That sounds great. My dog was really excited about it, apparently. he just loves Entre de Mer. I was just going to come back to your tides comment. It really does make sense between the two tides and the rivers if you're familiar with what we call brackish water or tidal influenced rivers. Rivers that empty into the sea, which is not all of them, but a lot of them, are all tidal influenced to a point. And it just depends on how far from the coast you have to go before the tides no longer affect the water level and the saline content. And in the case of the Gironde estuary, because it's such a large, it's more like it's like the Chesapeake Bay from our perspective here on the East Coast, which the tides affect way up into the rivers that feed the Chesapeake Bay. And it's very similar in the Bordeaux. You know, you'll see a tidal change well into the inland for all of those rivers.
Yes, a lot going on there with the rivers. They're not just pretty faces. They have big effects on the viticulture as well, and the climates, the mesoclimates and the microclimates, as we've talked about in past presentations. So the six families of Bordeaux wines will be coming to an end. We'll talk about the appellations of the Entre de Mer, and then we will dive into other aspects of Bordeaux, like classifications, like vintages, winemaking, all kinds of fun stuff coming up. So hopefully this tour of the six families of Bordeaux wines has been fun and educational for you. And please come back in 2 weeks on August 17th. There's going to be 3 Bordeaux shows in August because that's the way the calendar worked out this time. And as always, in off weeks, we have the pre-shift with Ron Edwards as your host. Tidbits of wisdom for hospitality, tidbits of everyday wisdom for hospitality. Do you want to tease anything, Ron, next week, or do you want?
Yeah, we're going to return next week, and the topic is arrogance versus boldness.
Oh, yes. Yes. I'm excited about
that. That's quite a tease right there because, you know, I have been accused of being an arrogant sommelier more than once.
And really, you were just being bold.
No, sometimes I was being arrogant. And we'll talk about that.
All right. So join us then. Stay safe.
You know what?
Yes?
I just realized I already recorded that one. The next one is making the most of your actual pre-shift.
Ah, yes, because I was away from arrogance and boldness, so I still haven't seen it.
I got confused. So yes, please go see that. I tell lots of stories of my own personal arrogance in there.
I was on vacation. I missed that one. Of all the ones to miss too. So next time's about the actual pre-shift and what to do at that time.
Yeah, team training in that moment before you open. Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. All right, so we will see you then. Stay safe, and thank you for watching.